from a topic point of view, which we're looking at lots of mobile stuff and modern social media, etc. But there seems to be one thing that we've been doing for years and still can't get quite right, and that's single sourcing and reusing content. And who better than Matthew, with his experience, to share his solutions and experience with us. So over to you, Matthew.
Thank you very much. And I hope no one's here expecting to hear about if a picture's worth 1,000 words, then what's a moving picture worth, because that's not what I'm going to be talking about in this session. I am going to be talking about smart ways to reuse content. I'm going to be talking about single sourcing. I'm not going to be giving you any wonderful, fantastic, new super solutions or new technologies that you haven't heard of before. What I'm going to be talking about is just ways of doing this in a kind of smart way, ways of thinking about the way we reuse information, and not necessarily just blindly assuming that the more we reuse information, the better. The talk is pretty much tools agnostic, although I will be mentioning one or two examples of the way tools do things. And I'm hoping that it will, there'll be things in this talk that you can all, you'll all identify with. I'm very happy to make it a fairly interactive session. If anyone came to my previous session, you'll know I had lots and lots of slides, which I tried to get through in 40 minutes. This time I don't have so many slides, and so there's plenty of time for you to intervene and disagree or comment on anything I say. I think last time I gave this presentation I had even less time, so I decided I'd skip introducing myself. But I'm Matthew Ellison, and I'm a consultant in user assistance, and I train people in how to use various tools. Right, now, what are we going to be talking about? Well, we're talking about single sourcing, and I thought I'd sort of define what I mean by single sourcing. And one of the interpretations of single sourcing is that we'll have some content which we'll write, but then we'll publish that in different ways. We'll publish it to different outputs. And so we'll get 3 different distinct outputs from this one source. And the idea is we only write the stuff once, but we get 3 times the value out of it. And that's what a lot of us mean by single sourcing. It's sometimes called multi-channel publishing. So that's one of the senses I'll be talking about single sourcing. Another one is slightly different, and that's what I'm going to call content reuse, which is where you might potentially have a project, a collection of information, but you may find that there's some little bit of information within that project that is so vital, so important, or so common that you need to keep repeating it in different places. It might be a sort of standard warning that's very important to issue every time you go through certain procedures. And again, you don't want to write that more than once. So what we're going to do, hopefully, is write that warning once, store it as a little piece of content within this project, and then insert that little bit of content in multiple places within the project. And then we might even go as far as saying, actually, it would be great if we could, that warning may be so important that we don't want to just use it in this project. We'd actually want to use it in both of these projects. So in that case, we need to sort of externalize all these useful little nuggets of information that are useful, and we want to be able to reuse them potentially in all our projects. That's another example of content reuse. And I'm going to be talking about different ways of doing these things as we go through the session. If you want to talk about full-blown, flexible, top-of-the-range single sourcing, or a sort of mixture of single sourcing and content reuse, then we're then talking about what's known as a content management system, which is essentially a sort of database, a repository of content, where all your little bits of content are objects that you can mix and match and reuse in any way you like. And that gives you total flexibility to get the best possible value out of all your information. It does mean you're certainly only going to have to write anything once, and then you can reuse it. You can include it in any of your deliverables. There's very few of the sort of well-known, commonly used authoring tools, help authoring tools that use this approach. AuthorIt is one. I know there are some AuthorIt users at this conference. AuthorIt has this sort of database approach. You have a library of information, and you can use it to build lots of different books or outputs from it. But some of you may be working in an environment where you are using a content management system, probably writing in XML, and this is a common approach particularly for people who have vast amounts of information, and it's just not, they can achieve very large savings by putting it all in a database, particularly if you're localizing, if you're having to translate to different languages. That's where it really makes sense to use this database content management system approach. I'm not going to be talking in great detail about that in this session, because I guess it's probably a minority of you who are in that position. Let me just talk about some scenarios for when it's useful to do single sourcing, and some of these are quite obvious, and some I can think of examples from my own experience of all of these. For example, variations of a product. About 10 years ago, I did quite a lot of consulting for Hewlett-Packard. I was doing some work for their all-in-one printers division. And they had, I was amazed at how many different products they had, how many printing products, how many products that were basically printers, but most of them would scan and send faxes as well. Actually, some would just print and scan, some would print and scan and send faxes. Some would scan and print and send faxes and did automatic document feeding. And just at that time, they were beginning to introduce wireless printers. So the really high-end models had a button for linking wirelessly to the printer. But essentially, all the printers had a lot in common. They were very, very similar. And it was just, the last digit in the product reference code told you that, it had a automatic document feeder. So it made sense that, you just wrote all the common information once and then maybe included a bit about this automatic document feeder within your project, but when you outputted the help or the manual for the model that didn't have that, you just remove it using a condition. As a matter of fact, believe it or not, they weren't doing that at the time. They did have separate sources for all the different printers, and I literally saw the divergence that one author would decide to make a slight change, and it wouldn't happen in all the other manuals, and of course that resulted in translation costs increasing. Since then, Hewlett-Packard have gone. That division I was working for have gone for a content management system, and all those sort of problems have gone away. Another example of where you might want a single source is if you've got very distinct different audiences. You might have network administrators who need certain different additional types of information than normal users, or you might want to specifically target novice users or advanced users and kind of personalize the information in that way. But there's going to be a lot of information which is common to all, so you don't want to write that more than once, clearly. Different countries, different locales. Some countries have particular requirements or particular legislation that requires you to state certain things in certain ways, particularly in the US. You may need to reference, US legislation, or, give very explicit warnings that aren't necessary perhaps in other countries, or maybe there's a special feature you introduce for a particular country because of their special needs and interests. So that's a case of where single sourcing is useful. And platform variations. These days with a lot of applications and information being consumed on a lot of different devices, not just different computing platforms, but mobile devices as well. You've got the situation where, for example, does it make sense to tell a mobile user to click when, you don't click a screen, you tap a screen? I've seen presentations where people have used I've seen people talk about projects where they've actually used variables for the action of clicking, and they've replaced that word click with tap for the mobile platform. Now, what I haven't mentioned there is different media. Well, I talked about mobile and desktop, but I haven't talked about print versus on-screen consumption of information. This is where I really wanted to, I'm interested to hear if anyone has any particular views. When I started, I kind of specialize in user assistance, or what we used to call online help. And when I started writing help 20-odd years ago, the tools that were around at that time, which were RoboHelp, a tool called HDK, which some of you might remember. They were all purely tools for creating online help. That's all they did. But I heard about this other tool called Doc2Help, which was a slightly different paradigm. With Doc2Help, you would write a manual, a print manual in Word, and then it would automatically transform that into a help system that had exactly the same content. And I sort of was a bit sniffy about this. I used to say, no, you can't do that. I want to write my help in a completely different way to the way I write my printed manual. I'm not happy that I just get an online version of my printed manual. And part of me still thinks the same thing today. Of course, we now take single sourcing for granted. I mean, none of us have time to write a completely separate help system than a printed manual. So almost for purely practical reasons, we've started doing single sourcing. And we also have, our single sourcing tools have become a lot more sophisticated. For example, we have conditions. We can assign tags to pieces of content and say, oh no, that bit's only for print, or that bit's only for our novice users. And we've also got style sheets where we can represent our information quite differently for print and online. But essentially, a lot of us are churning out exactly the same content for our PDF manuals as for our online help systems. And I just wonder if we're doing a good enough job. Are we putting the users first with that approach? Do we in fact should we be taking a fundamentally different approach when we create our PDFs or our, what we might think of as print manuals versus our online help systems? Anyone got any strong thoughts on that? Yeah. It was completely different. Completely different. Mm-hmm. Right. So IBM at that time were thinking, if people are going for a printed manual, they're probably looking for a completely different type of information. Their needs are different. We need to be presenting different information in a different way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. Okay. And did you have a... Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. 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 Interesting. Yeah. 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 And I guess I still have this sort of distinction in my mind between printed books, which I kind of, I was at a session by Mike Hamilton, and he was recommending a book on CSS. And I thought, oh yeah, that's a book, I'd buy that, I'd read it. I'd sit down and read it, and that would tell me all I need to know about CSS. Now, I would never dream of doing that with an online help system, of sitting and starting at topic 1 and reading through the entire help system. We design help as a source of reference, random access, and so we write little self-contained topics that will help people out of a problem, provide a solution. Now, if you read a book that consists of lots and lots of little self-contained solutions to problems, you have no narrative flow. It doesn't work as a book. So there's clearly at the two ends of the spectrum, you have a novel with a narrative, and you have the reference book, and clearly they're very different beasts. And what we're trying to do is find a sort of something that is a halfway house that will work as both a book and it's a challenge. Anyway, I wanted to raise that because I think you need to think about this issue before you plow ahead and just do lots of single sourcing. So some practical tips. Number one, I've been to conferences where usually they're not conferences like this, where with authors are sort of putting the user first and crafting great content. But I've been to conferences where literally someone stands up and says, we managed to reuse 78% of our content. And, as though that means therefore, by definition, we did a fantastic job. We didn't actually see any of that content we produced. We weren't able to gauge how well that satisfied the needs of the end users. So just because you've achieved a certain level of reuse doesn't necessarily mean you've done a brilliant job. Secondly, I talked about those two extremes of, printed novels versus online help for reference. Now, I believe that it makes sense when you're writing information that you think about your primary output type. Now, what I mean by that is think about what's the way in which most of your users are likely to be consuming your information. And you need to do a bit of research on that. You may find you have a very conservative audience, for one reason or another, who love printed documentation, who print everything, who even if you give them a help file, they'll print it out and read it. If that's the case, I would choose to write and design my content in a very different way than if I knew that my audience were all very young people who are going to be reading all my information on a mobile phone, for example. Secondly, and you all know about this, write in a way that doesn't kind of make an assumption about the medium. I mean, the obvious thing is, you never say in a help system, as we saw in the last chapter, as you might do in a book. But you can take that further. In the case of, for example, my printers at Hewlett-Packard, I guess what you could do is, instead of referring to specific printing devices, you could just talk about the printer, because then you can reuse that information when you're talking about any printer or any model, or you could even talk about the product. I'm slightly wary about taking this too far, because as a consumer of information, I sometimes read leaflets or instructions or pamphlets that are just so general. They've obviously been written in a way that just means they can reuse the same information for virtually everything they produce, that I completely discount its applicability to me. It's not talking about the device I bought. That's no help at all. So I don't think you can't go. You must not go too far down that road. I'll talk slightly more about this in a moment. When you're reusing information, you've got to be careful about the chunks of information that you reuse. And I'm going to clarify, I hope, this in a moment and talk about the fact that these chunks need to be sort of self-contained chunks. It's not, you can't just take a sentence and assume that that sentence will work just because it happens to be kind of relevant. It will work wherever you drop it in any topic. You've got to think about the overall flow of that topic and decide whether that sentence makes sense in its own right. Conditions I mentioned earlier, and I was having an interesting discussion about conditions just after lunch, and they're great. But I've run into cases where people have taken conditions too far. They've got a single project, and within that project, they've got sort of 50 different conditions, some of which are countries, some of which are types of information, some are platforms, and by the time they've applied all the relevant conditions and they've tried to construct all the different conditional build expressions, they've got so confused that and when they change a bit of content, they're not quite sure of how that's going to impact on their result because it depends which conditions we choose, and that's, I think, you can take conditions too far. And there are I get to a point with some projects where I think, look, we're pushing conditions too far. Let's actually go for two separate projects. Maybe there's some common information between those two projects, but we can perhaps handle the content reuse in a better way than using conditions. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. I mentioned the databases for content reuse. Many of you will be familiar with the concept of snippets, as they're often called. Remember I talked about reusing that standard warning in multiple places. I would use a snippet for that. Variables as well. Variables are used for things like product names, telephone numbers, that sort of thing. Robohelp and Flare both use snippets and variables. If you're working in Ditter, then you can reuse a piece of content that you've used before by using a conref. That's a bit like in FrameMaker using I think it's a text inset, isn't it, in FrameMaker, where you just say, I want to include a bit of content I've used elsewhere, save you writing it again. And you've also got, this is sort of Ditter's equivalent of variables, where you can define in your Ditter map the name of a product, for example, and then just refer to it using a key name. And that means using different Ditter maps, you can produce different outputs that refer to your product using a different name. And I've just got a little table here to compare. Sometimes people get a little bit confused about what's the difference between a snippet and a variable. And the main thing is that snippets are sort of blocks of content that can be as long as you like, whereas variables are typically just little strings, little text strings. So variables would be, as I say, typically a product name, whereas a snippet could be an entire chunk of content, which consists of text, image, a table. If you want to reuse that block of content because it makes sense, all that content needs, I talked about self-contained blocks of content. If that content all needs to belong together because it won't work if you split it apart, then that would be a snippet which you can insert in lots of different places within your project. Oh, one of the things I really like about variables, and any of you who are Robohelp or Flare users, this applies to you, that when you've defined a variable, you can redefine that variable for specific outputs. Which means, for example, if you're suddenly asked to build a help system or build a PDF file for your American users, but in America, you're branding your product differently, you're giving it a different name, you can just go into one place, you can go to that variable definition, but you go into it not where you've defined the variable initially, but you go to it in your output settings, and you say, just for this output, just when I'm building this US PDF file, I want the product name to change. And that won't affect your other outputs. It's just a way of overriding that variable definition for that particular output. And that's one of the reasons I use variables a lot, is it gives me the ability to change the value of variables for specific outputs. Now, remember, sorry, I've probably got my slides in the wrong order, but you remember I was saying a minute ago about conditions can get very complicated, and sometimes it's easier to sort of think about different projects. Well, here's where you often have sort of two options. You've got a situation where you're trying to build different deliverables, maybe different help systems for different printing products, or different manuals, and there's some common content, just like there was with my Hewlett-Packard printers. And what you could do is just have one project and try and build all your outputs from that one project and use conditions. But then, if the products start diverging too much and you end up with so many conditions that your content's riddled with conditions, that's where you might actually say, well, look, it's getting too complicated. What we'll do is we'll split it apart. We will have 5 different projects, but we recognize there is some common content between those projects. So what we'll do is we'll put all that common content, we'll save those as snippets, those blocks of content I was talking about, and most authoring tools will allow you now to store those snippets outside of the project. If you're a Flare user, you would typically store your snippets in what's called a global project. That's a project where you store any common assets, images, snippets that you want to reuse in multiple projects. In RoboHelp now, you can use what's called the resource manager to set up a repository of useful snippets. And then even though you've got 5 different projects, you're sharing snippets, you're using the same snippet in all 5 projects, so you're still only writing the content once and having to edit it once if it needs changing. So the option you choose here really depends on the level of commonality between your different outputs. On one extreme, if there's only tiny differences between the different outputs, you go for one project and use conditions. On the other extreme, if there's lots of differences but some common content, then you'd use option 2. I'm talking about linking and including, because I've talked about reusing information, but sometimes we want to avoid pulling in the same information into multiple places. And some people say to me, well, why don't you just link to it? Remember when the web was first invented, that's what everyone was so excited about. It was hyperlinks, it was hypertext. Links were great, and everything had lots and lots of links. I'm actually not a huge fan of links, certainly not a huge fan of inline links. Links that are in the middle of text. Because what happens if you watch users is they're reading procedure and they get to step 3, there's a link there, they'll click on that link, and they'll never come back and do step 4. They really won't. So I think if information is essential in step 3, thank you, then you might want to pull in that additional bit of information. Don't link out to it, but pull it in as a snippet. Do guard against sort of overload, though. You don't want to, but you might think, oh, well, they might need this bit of information, I'll pull it in. Then you're giving people too much. So you've got to think about, well, do they need it? Are they novices? Are they experts? Consider using progressive disclosure, dynamic HTML, to make the snippet content optional. You can do that with snippets. You can pull in a snippet, bit of content you've written elsewhere, but then hide it and make it optional so that the user has to click to see it. And I've got an example of that here. This is quite a nice, this is a topic from the Flare documentation, where if you click here, you see an example. Now, they're probably reusing that example in more than one topic. So when you click on example, you're actually displaying a snippet, which is being used in 10 different places. But, it's a hidden snippet. It's available on request. And again, here we've got more examples of progressive disclosure. You can choose those links if you want. I've now got an example of it, in my view, taken too far. Whenever Flare gives you instructions about, it's a very simple instruction how to add a target. Now, adding a target in Flare is dead easy. But what happens is in step 1, they get completely bogged down, in my view, because they're saying, well, depending on whether you're using the ribbon or menus, you'll do one of these. And, you might want to know about how to switch between ribbons and menus. And here's more about ribbon options. So they're trying to take into account everybody's needs. They're saying, well, it could be someone who's never met Flare before, so they might want to know what a ribbon is. And to be honest, I think that's wrong. And that happens every time you're asked to use the ribbon. Good. Okay. Yeah. So that's taking this. Yeah. This because they could, they did, and they shouldn't have. No. I mentioned narrative flow. Narrative flow is actually kind of important. You might think that just because we're not writing novels, so we don't have a narrative flow. I think we do. I'm a great follower of Mark Baker. Every page is page 1. He blogs a lot. You might have seen his work. And he and Tom Johnson, who's someone else I follow, are great believers in the fact that information is helpful to users if it has a flow. So even short topics will have a narrative flow. And in fact, a topic is as long or as short as it needs to be. In fact, we should make short topics, but as long as the topic is short enough to give the user the shortest possible narrative flow they need to solve their problems. So everything we write has some kind of narrative flow, believe me. However, what we're doing is not writing novels. It is fairly technical, so we do have things like tables, and we have warnings and notes. And tables and notes and tips and warnings all have little content boundaries. Often, although it's not necessarily a good thing, we put boxes, for example, around our notes or our tips. Now, anything like that has a distinct boundary is something you can safely reuse. You can safely reuse a note that has a box around it. You can safely reuse a table because it is a self-contained piece of information. What you cannot safely reuse is a sentence within a paragraph, or even necessarily a paragraph within a topic, because that paragraph may have been crafted to have its place, its particular role within that narrative flow of the topic. So don't necessarily assume you can reuse paragraphs. What you might end up with is very disjointed topics that have no narrative flow. Certainly from a localization perspective, you need to be very wary about reusing parts of sentences, because it just doesn't. What is a particular part of a sentence in English will not be the same part of a sentence in German or Spanish, and you get in a big mess. From a localization perspective, reusing paragraphs is okay, but remember, not necessarily from a narrative point of view. 5 minutes. Right, well, that's it. So there are some great... Whoa, come back. There are some really big advantages of information reuse. It helps us. It cuts down the amount of work we do. Plus, from a positive point of view, end user's point of view, we get consistency, which is less confusing for our users. But if you do it too much, you end up doing a disservice to your users, I believe. Select your strategy based on how much common content there is between your outputs, and do remember, anyone who's doing localization, do keep that in mind, because that's going to affect your decision about strategy, definitely. Now, does anyone have... I asked for disagreements, so Derek, yeah. So context is all important, is what you're saying. You have to review in context. Yes, yes, and I think I do agree with that. Yeah, it might be a slightly different type of review. It may not need to be as exhaustive a review, but it's checking, does this make sense to be reused in that context? Yeah, yeah, very good point. Yeah. Uh-huh. Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it is. I mean, that's the sort of scenario where perhaps a content management system would be useful, because then you can sort of store, you can pair up these. Yeah. Right. Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. 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 I think most companies would sort of say, well, we've got to make a decision. We've got to go one way or the other. Which one's going to give us less grief? Which one's going to give us less pain? Right. Yeah. Tricky. Sure. Yeah. 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 Uh, what, and turn it into sort of mid-Atlantic English? Yeah. Oh. Oh, okay. Oh. Right. Mm. Oh, I see. Right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Do you charge as much for translating from English to American as you do from English to French? Yeah. Yep, that's it. Yep. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming.
Can I just remind you about the monkey survey? And another thing I would like to say, as Matthew forgot his introductory slide he had in the other talk. You know on Amazon when it says people who bought this book also like this book. So if you like this conference, of course we want you to come back next year, but you might also like to go to Matthew's conference.
Oh, that's kind of you. And if you want this is my free gift for today. If you want the copy of the slides from the conference that happened 3 months ago in Krakow, then just go to that URL, put in your name, and you'll get a link to the full set of slides.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's quite loud. So I'm really glad to see some people did choose the gamification. It's going to be a very light session with lots of fun. I'm going to play some videos, and I'm not going to go over too many controversial topics. So the idea is I give you the flavor of it, and hopefully we'll get encouraged and figure out we want to go and explore more. Okay, so that's kind of the idea of where we're heading with that. So gamification is the new black, and why is it so? Well, it became extremely popular a few years ago, and everybody started talking about it. Everybody in the Silicon Valley started doing it, and then like people started saying we might be doing. And what is it? You know, why should we be doing it or not? So this particular presentation has been inspired by this particular guy. Kevin is an awesome teacher, and if you are not already on Coursera, I encourage you to go there. You can study online for free, and it is an extremely excellent and all-encompassing course that will teach you all you need to know in quite good detail. I think he's going to run it again this year, so highly recommended. You will notice if you do the course that I am pinching quite a few of principles that he is teaching. So this is kind of where I'm starting. 10,000 hours to become a professional, good quality expert in the field. I mean, we've heard this before, and I thought, like, I'm going to go and calculate, just roughly. Say if I did study some domain for 5 hours a day, right? Every day of the week, how long would it take me to acquire that number of hours? And it came sort of like over 5 years, and no, we don't have that. And especially in this presentation, who knows what that means? Exactly. Well, and didn't listen either. We can't go to that depth. So what we're going to do? We have 40 minutes, right? So the two things we're going to do today is we're going to know and we're going to discover that gamification is fun, right? And that we can do it, all of us, today, if we want to. How we're going to do it is a different question, but just these 2 points we're going to go over and over again. So I often being asked 2 questions, where are you from and what do you do? And both questions very hard to answer. And this is how I feel about what do you do? And that's a typical reaction of people I get as well. Like, the longer I'm trying to explain what it is exactly I'm doing for a living, I'm thinking, no, just lose the will to live. So, okay, so is there an alternative approach? Yeah, I think so, I want to get to this nice and cozy, warm feeling, fuzzy feelings, like, wow, you're really cool. So a few disclaimers. So here comes disclaimer number 1. I'm obviously not a domain expert. To be successful in gamification, you probably need to know quite a lot about business because it's typically applied in the business domain. You also need to understand the games, the game principles, lots and lots of things, maybe a bit of psychology thrown in. So once upon a time, when you wanted to practice Kung Fu, you'd have to fight 3 masters, right? So we're going to watch a little bit from The Legend of Grandmaster by Donnie when he's fighting the first master there. Oops, it doesn't work like that. And I was promised it will. No fear, there is another way of doing the same. It's not working. Sally, could you help me, please? I don't know, it was supposed to play, we've embedded them, and now they don't play. So it looks good, but it does not play anymore. And I don't know whether that's because I'm not playing it off the USB. The video in the folder was there. Oh, okay, I wasn't clicking on the right thing. That one. but now we can't get it there. You can kill, yeah, you can just kill the stuff, yeah. Duplicate. Try and duplicate. Okay. There we are. Sorry.
No way walking up like that.
Sorry about the dubbing.
No style at all.
Distinguished Masters, I'm Ip Man, of Foshan Wingshun, student of Chen Huoshun. It is my honor to meet you all.
Come on, who will be the one to challenge?
Master Law, why are you waiting?
Let's see who wants to go first. Okay, I'll go first. Please.
Please.
Better be careful, little brother.
So that'd probably be technical writers us taking the UX people on, you know. We might just about survive it. So back to the presentation and escape. And right. So that was the first disclaimer. I'm not the domain expert, but I don't have keen interest. I play games. I probably don't have those 10,000 hours playing games. Anybody here plays games? What kind of games you guys like playing? Yeah. Anybody plays multiplayer? Yeah, RPGs, that kind of, yeah, a little bit. So we kind of know the game structure and the principle. We're not designers just yet, but we understand how the games swing. So the second disclaimer is, for a lot of people, notion of gamification is perfectly horrid. So why is it so? Because it kind of can be abusive, you know, it can be viewed as pretty much points, leaderboards, and badges, and you know, like there's a lot of controversy. And why is the controversy? Well, because it hit mainstream. So when something is printed in Metro, and you can actually read about gamification in Metro, you know it hit mainstream. And the way the ideas are presented, they're presented on a very sort of narrow and very basic understanding. And that distorts the idea somehow. So we're viewing it from a very narrow lens. So that's kind of Metro. That the other thing, I just want to kind of make you aware that it had some bad publicity. So, for example, Disneyland was heavily criticized for putting leaderboards for their cleaners. There was a huge backlash about that. Then there was a lot of criticism about pointification. And one of the things it says that we bring the least essential to games elements and you know, trying to apply it to business and make it exciting. So that's kind of the big criticism there. The exploitationware, that coming from the game designers who are very unhappy about the way that's being implemented. This is an example of Ian Bogus, the guy from the other slide, who created this cow clicker application, like a little guy, just to prove it was a satire on how gamification shouldn't be done, well, actually how it shouldn't be done at all, and then become wildly popular. So you can go and explore, and he actually started monetizing, you know, something he was against. He actually being paid for the game he made to prove this is a horrid concept. Another thing I'm not going to be talking about, the gamification platform. So some of these principles are used in HR to manage people and to create various things. So I'm not going to touch those. If you want, you can Google for them. I'm interested in actually taking the interesting aspects of game and make life exciting. So I'm interested in the fun aspect, and that's what we'll be discussing today. So these are the kind of the domain masters we've talked a little bit. These are the guys potentially we could be taking on. Again, some of them are a bit more in business. Gabe, for example, and Amy, they're a bit more business practitioners, while Jane, Richard Bartle, just Snell, Mark LeBlanc, they're more gamers, proper gamers. So Google, go and watch some presentations by them. They're extremely engaging, very interesting. So these are the kind of the guys. Tons of literature. The whole gamification is not an old domain, but it's already got lots and lots and lots of literature, so you can go and study. And just to remind, we only have 40 minutes, so we're going to go back to the point number 1. It's all about us understanding gamification is fun and that you can do it. So what is gamification? I've been talking a lot about it, so what is it? The first definition I'm taking is from Kevin, and you'll see he says it's use of game elements and game design techniques in non-game context, which can be anything. It does not have to be necessarily narrowly business applied. We can apply it to our own user instructions. We can apply it to going to school, to driving a car, to anything. So that's number 1, coming from a professor, the university, who likes multiple perspectives. The second definition I'm going to use comes from the guy who uses it to help businesses adopt gamifications, insert it into websites. And you'll see they're very, very similar. So using game thinking and game dynamics to engage audiences and solve problems. Does this sound familiar to us? I mean, what is that we do for a living? We're actually trying to engage audiences and solve their problems on a daily basis, right? And I think it's a really good translation, and a really good bridge between what it is that we do and what it is gamification is supposed to stand for. So what is the key? The key is to think like a game designer. And game designers create those experiences that get players to play and that keeps players playing. And I have some questions for you. We already established that some of us play games, but those of us who play games, why do you like playing games? Anybody wants to kind of engage? Yeah? Education. Any other reasons why we play? Yeah? Anything else? Social. Meditation. Yeah, I love doing the fishing games, for example. You just sit and you fish, and sometimes there's a boat. Yeah. Killing time. Anybody plays Warcraft? Any Warcraft players? No. Well, I used to play for hours, and I used to actually go to the city with some crystals singing, and I should just sit there and listen to the crystals. That was my gameplay. So why do I actually keep playing games? So those of us who do play and enjoy it, why do we keep returning? So we might get some few rewards, so we might get some pleasure out of it. Any other reason why do we think we're returning to the games? Perfect, yes, competition aspect. That's a fantastic point. Meet people, yeah, again, social aspect. Habit. Habits, yes, habit formation is one of the things actually, that throws bad light on gamification. People are worried that forming specific habits and then monetizing these habits is a bad thing. It could be. Everything could be bad. So, we're going to watch, again, Mass Effect trailer. Again, so I probably won't dare to try it. I'll just go straight into it. So just remind ourselves what's like a good immersive game feeling
like. The Reapers hit without warning. Earth took the brunt of the attack. A few of us remained behind to protect and defend. what's left of Earth free. Or die trying. Today, each of you must become more than a soldier. And until the fleet's return, you are the last line of defense. The Earth is ours. And if they want it, they'll have to go through us to get it.
That was one of the trailers from Mass Effect, and as you can see, as a player, we weren't thinking about how the game was structured. It was quite immersive. As a game designer, would have to think, how do we actually create that type of experience? Think about all the components we need to replicate that experience. And going back to like how it is applied in business, it's applied in several areas. Like, you know, in this particular case, we're mainly interested is it engaging within the marketing, sales, HR productivity, and behavioral changes. And as I said, this is not the presentation to get you into the enterprise way of thinking. It's just I want to show you how enterprise way of thinking is already applying it. So this particular one, so basically, this is how the customer engagement is being driven through inserting some aspects of games into it. And I'm going to play Little Big Planet trailer first. Then I'm going to play Starbucks rewards. And your challenge is to find the differences between the two. So one is the trailer for the game. The other one is the trailer for the Starbucks rewards. Are there any differences between the two? Okay. Everything that Chris said the gamification for you, we can see everything is here. Leaderboards, budgets, cutesy music, changing and avatar. Point collection. So that was the games trailer, and now we're gonna watch the actual Starbucks rewards trailer, which is your sales marketing. See how they've done it. So the question is, do we see any difference between them? in principle. Yes, no? Yes. Yeah, than the game itself. Uh-huh. Yeah. Then the yeah. 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 Did we spot here gone? Mm-hmm. 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 Overlaps. Yeah. Okay. Sounds like we can have a nice debate afterwards what gamification is strictly. So, did we see any similarities between them? Because I was concentrating on the differences, but any similarities? Yeah. Which is supposed to be emotive and like, draw you in, make you feel all cozy. Yeah. Yeah. Go on. Yeah. 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 Anybody's seen points collection happening? No, any badges, fireworks, yeah. Lots of things. Okay, let's move on to... so this one I want to show really briefly just how the gamification, like games and stuff, is being used currently in education. I think I have a little bit of time. We can get into that. So what I'm doing right now is I'm kind of trying to show you a few examples of it. Then we can reach a conclusion before we move into how we implement that. Okay. Don't know what happened to the sound there.
Parkview Centerpoint Elementary School in White Bear Lake, where traditional learning has taken on a technical twist with results so impressive, even the head of Best Buy's Geek Squad came by to take a peek.
What Sawyer and Elder are doing is playing a game called Times Attack. And Times Attack allows me as a teacher to set up my class and have accounts for each student. It all starts here as far as multiplication skills go. And as soon as multiplication skills down, division is down as well. And 80% of my students have multiplication skills to 12 down. What these two students are doing is playing a game called Tut-Pup. As you can see on the flag here, Tiana is playing a student from Canada.
Onwards. I have quite a few trailers for this part. Right, this is my favorite. This is actually an example of how we can insert elements of game and drive behavior change, like in this case, social responsibility. And you'll see why. Again, pay attention to the music. Imagine user guide being unveiled. New help system going on. Okay, and the last one, we're sort of nicely coming out of all the videos now. There's just one more to show. Will be that one. So anybody seen that before? No. So that's very interesting. That's again driving the behavior change. Yeah, let's just get into it. This is from the site called thefuntheory.com, and there's a few other examples. One will be to actually reward people who do not speed up by having a lottery that draws on the money collected from those who do speed up. It's a really good one, if you haven't already. So, the question I'm having right now is, what do you think all of those kind of stuff, the clips I showed you, have in common? I mean, I'll tell you what it is for me, but you tell me, what do you think they all have in common? The commonality, common theme. Perfect, and that kind of thing is fun. You all like having fun as human species. So it was all about fun. It wasn't about monetizing it or anything. It was about just engaging and experiencing things together. So that is fun, as I was saying. That's what it is for me. So that's what I'm seeking. I'm seeking you to kind of think about the gamification and then a new trend and try to locate that sense of fun and experience and adventure and see if there is something you can research and bring into your writing and into your work, to increase it, to enhance it. That's kind of my goal, because we can all find bad things and moan and say, well, that's distorted, that's shallow, but it will require 10,000 hours to not be shallow. So let's be shallow, but from the fun perspective. And that's the kind of little bit of that little stab at the 10,000 hours. You can read about the 8 kinds of fun and research from Marc LeBlanc, who actually classify that fun from gaming perspective, because you can have different types of fun, and there's several theories. I particularly like this one. Game is an obstacle course, it's an unfolding story. That's for explorers. There's also different types of gamers out there, and we'll come to that, hopefully. So game is sense pleasure, that be me fishing or sitting in Warcraft and just listening to the crystals singing. I like that. So anybody has a specific type of fun they connect to? Anybody likes to share what kind of fun they prefer? Yeah, different games. Yeah, so, variety will be another key. So, we don't have to go with just one kind of fun. You can insert different types to engage people more. So now I'm coming to kind of show good examples of gamification. See, I'm avoiding all these sites where they put the badges, leaderboards for square type, although they have changed recently. They're not doing much of that. So I'm actually concentrating on the pure fun, like useful stuff. So this particular one is a very interesting example, and I'll play. I've got one more thing to play. So Evoke is an educational game, and this is about pretty much solving the world's problems. So let's have a look how they gone about it. It's been so much better if we just played. I'll be getting out of it. That's the last clip.
Are you certain they exist? How do we contact them?
You have to send an evoke.
Show me. My name is Alchemy, and this is an urgent evoke. Wherever you are, whoever you are, if you found this message, it's your destiny to join us. Humanity needs our help. If you have a problem and you can't solve it alone, evoke it.
That's kind of a good example of motivating people to study and figure out the world's problems. And another good one example of the gamification on the site, I found this one. It's actually one of the American libraries that try to encourage teenagers during summer term to read more books. So they set it up. I'm not going to the site. Again, you can go there and have a look. But it's got beautiful graphics. It's got all the game plan panned out. And you'll see there's badges, leaderboards, and they also have points. So in theory, it shouldn't work because one of the major criticisms to gamification is... I'm probably standing too close to the mic. I'm sounding a bit loud, I think. Thank you. So one of the kind of major criticism is the overuse of PBLs. This is the site that uses them, and I think it uses them pretty effectively. Now about you, and I've got, I think, just under 8 minutes to go through it. So we've done the fun. We kind of looked a bit at the games, looked a bit at like how they operate. What can you do in this 10 minutes? I'm going to make you into master builders. We're all going to be doing it in a second. So if you want to know more, again, I say 10,000 hours. Go and get it on Coursera. That's the best place. So we're going to have 5 levels on the boss fight together. Okay, so define business objectives and all that. Let's have a look. So first one, level 1, we're defining business objectives. So before you start doing anything, we need to figure out why it is we want to do it. So let's say we want new users gain foundational knowledge in something, or we want users to make habit of following installation instructions. Whatever that is, we need to define it. So there is a purpose to it. Then the level 2, we need to delineate target behavior. I'll translate. So we basically need to measure it somehow. I know it's management speak, but we still need to know whether we succeeded, and if we succeeded, how we succeeded. You know, maybe we print some T-shirts, and I sort of tell you why I'm using that example, but, you know, whatever. People completed, we give them T-shirts. There's some background analytics going on, maybe certificates of completion, maybe a few nice badges, maybe a trophy, you know, think award ceremony. But something has to be done. Right, so the level 3, as technical writers, we're absolutely used and trained to think about the audience. This is something we do really well. The only additional element we need to bring in is we need to kind of figure out what motivates our audience, or in this particular case, players. Again, there's a lot of theories on the types of players. I've picked the easiest one by battle, and it pretty much fluctuates between how people like to interact with the world and whether they like acting or interacting. So achievers will be those of us who want to have more points to get their goal fulfilled, more challenges. Explorers, that'd be me, sat there listening to the crystal, or, wandering somewhere to do some fishing. Socializers, we had some people today mentioning they like the social aspect, so those would be the people sat in a pub in Warcraft and just talking to each other, with nice little avatars. And the killers, well, that's a complicated one. They're not going around killing others. No, they just like to enforce their opinion on others. It could translate into player versus player when you literally get killed where you shouldn't be, or it could be just like your point is being pushed across very firmly, like I might do sometimes, will there. These kind of loops, this is where we're dipping into psychology, and it's kind of nice to go into detail, but just to explain, whenever there is a successful action and we get feedback on that action, our motivation increases. So that creates a loop. So to trigger certain behaviors, we need to kind of take that particular loop into consideration. And there are two types of loops. So the one is engagement loop, and the second one is the player journey progression. Again, as technical writers, this is something we're very familiar with. We know we cannot take a new user from ground zero to experience straight away. We've done the training wheels approach. We know how to gradually build up their expertise. Game use very similar principle of onboarding, and this is why it translates extremely well into our domain. So one thing to kind of remember that if we had too many challenges continuously, people get tired and people get bored. So there needs to be a period of very little activity or flatlining, and hence, you'll see like a bit of scaffolding. And the same as in films, if the first boss fight is quite big, the next one has to be bigger because we get bored again. It's like the boredom sets in. So the higher we go in that progression level, the more interesting it's. And the motivators appear, like the more things we overcome, the more motivated we're to go forth and overcome more. So level 5, remember fun. So we need to tap into emotions. This one, I'm not endorsing by any ways. This is the Ribbon Hero. There's Ribbon Hero and Ribbon Hero 2. I've installed it. I try to use it. Personally, I'm not fond of. Go forth, have a look what they're doing. There are some very interesting aspects of game in there for very, very new user who's never probably used Microsoft in their life. I think it will work. I'm not so sure it works on me. And this one is actually has been presented a couple of years ago, this specific example by Alice Pratt. I think he was doing it at the EU Europe. Anyhow, so that is Ellison, where they've got probably horrible installation process. Instead of going to their designers, software engineers saying, come on, improve it, we are not happy with that, they just gone ahead and created a game where the bad installation is a dragon that needs to be slayed, and as you're successfully slaying it through the stages, you will get a t-shirt. And you will be called Dragon Slayer. So instead of saying your installation instructions are rubbish and your installation process is horrid, say, yes, let's slay another dragon. I want another t-shirt. Like, I don't know how ethical it is, but it certainly works. Boss fight, probably 30 seconds for the boss fight. So these are the pyramids of the game elements. This is one of the ways of looking. Dynamics, mechanics, components. I'm going to fly through them, and you'll see why. So dynamics is your big picture. We looked at the Mass Effect, and it was a different game from Little Big Planet. So this is pretty much where it will happen, is the stylistics of the game and the narrative. Mechanics is what drives it forward. So some of us like to go and do daily challenges. Some like to just sit by the fishing pond and listen to the music. So these are your processes to drive the dynamics forward. And then we have the components. And this is frequently being, when gamification get criticized, saying that this is where we start and end. No, that's not where we start and end. The good designed, gamified system will look at all of the elements in balance. But anyway, so these are the kind of the little things you can play, and you can enhance your wiki experience for your users by say, introducing some points or badges. Now, how effective that will be, people are a bit tired of the same thing over and over again, so maybe not that effective now. We're going to deploy just a very simple thing. If you want a conservative look on your getting started for some new product, you can have a little pointer at the bottom saying like there's only 3 steps remaining to encourage people. You can have with the essentials or whatever, conservatively, right? Or you can go for a brave look. You can do something like that. Depends on your users. Okay, so that's our celebration. Let's say we had 40 minutes, and I hope you will come out of the session thinking gamification is fun, and you can do it. You just need to invest in 10,000 hours that I mentioned. Thank you very much. Thank you. You liked it?
No, because I played it. I played it so much. I immediately went into fight mode. That's how your brain gets gamified so much. No, not sorry. It just made me laugh. Because it was like, I could just feel my heart, especially with the beeping noise. I don't know if you played Mass Effect.
I did.
Yeah,
I
the beeping noise.
I didn't play the extension, but I couldn't put the regular trailer because you put this naked aliens there. You know, when not the orders, but that's spectacle.
I don't know.